The morning sun bled pale light across the arid plains when Eliza Carter stood on the porch of her brother's boarding house, clutching the handle of a single carpet bag. Cedar Falls had turned out to watch not because they cared where she went, but because they craved the cruel entertainment of seeing her leave. Whispers rustled along the street, sharp as spurs against stone. Barren cursed useless. The words had haunted her for years, and now they followed her like a funeral dirge. Her brother William shifted beside her, eyes fixed on the dusty street instead of her face. His wife clutched a shawl over her swelling belly, voice thin with pity. "It's for the best, Eliza. We have mouths to feed. You'll have a roof, food, and maybe some peace." Eliza's jaw tightened. Peace was not what they were offering. They were casting her off, handing her to a man they barely knew. Levi Carter, a recluse rancher who lived 20 miles north. His wife and child had died of fever 3 winters past, and he had buried himself in silence ever since. The town whispered he was half mad with grief. To them it was a fitting match. The barren woman and the broken man. 2 misfits sent to fade where no one had to look at them. A wagon creaked to a halt before the porch. Old Benjamin Rourke. The driver tipped his hat. He did not smile. Like everyone else, he knew the cruel joke being played. Eliza lifted her chin and stepped down, her boots crunching against the gravel. The crowd watched in silence as she climbed into the wagon. A child's voice pierced the hush. "Ma, why is Miss Eliza going away?" The answer came sharp, cutting through her heart. "She's going where she belongs." The wagon lurched forward, carrying her past the church where she once stood a bride, past the cemetery where her husband lay, past the judgmental stares of neighbors who believed her exile long overdue. Eliza gripped her bag tighter, knuckles white. Everything she owned rattled inside 2 dresses, patched thin, a Bible, worn soft by her late husband's hand, and a locket with no picture inside. It was enough and yet far too little. The hours stretched long as prairie grass. Clouds gathered heavy with rain. When the sky broke open, water drenched her dress until it clung to her skin, turning the journey into a baptism of humiliation. By the time the wagon stopped at a crooked gate, both driver and passenger were soaked through. "This is as far as I take you," Benjamin said, his voice rough. "His ranch is half a mile up the track." He hesitated, eyes softening for the first time. "You don't have to go through with this. I could tell folks you went east." "I have no east," Eliza replied. Her voice surprised even her with its steadiness. "Thank you, Mr. Rourke, but I'll see it through." The wagon rolled away, leaving her in the mud with only the bag in a trunk too heavy to drag. Eliza lifted her skirts and began the walk. Rain dripped from her hair into her eyes. The land stretched endless and gray. Each step felt like a verdict. When the house finally came into view, it rose from the prairie like a ghost. Logs weathered silver by years of storms. A barn leaned like an old drunk, and a thin ribbon of smoke curled from the chimney. It looked less like a home than a place waiting to collapse. The porch groaned under her weight before she could knock the door open. Levi Carter filled the frame, tall shoulders, broad hair dark and streaked with gray. His eyes froze her where she stood, steel blue, empty as winter skies. "You're the woman from town," he said, voice flat as stone. "Eliza Carter," she answered, chin lifted though rain streamed down her face. His gaze swept her dripping figure, then flicked toward the gate. "Where's your trunk?" "Too heavy." Without another word, he strode past her. Minutes later, he returned, the trunk balanced on one shoulder as though it weighed nothing. He set it down gently inside, then stepped aside. "Best come in. Storm's not done." The interior was sparse dust, thick on every surface. The air smelled of ashes and loneliness. Levi motioned down a hall. "Room at the end." "Cleared it yesterday." His tone gave nothing away, but Eliza's heart clenched. That room had belonged to his wife once. Now it would hold her exile. When she returned in dry clothes, a plate of beans and cornbread waited on the table. Levi ate his supper outside on the porch, leaving her to the silence inside. When she finished and washed the dishes, he came back smelling of rain and wood smoke. Leaning against the door, he spoke with finality. "This isn't marriage. I need help. You need a roof. Nothing more." "I understand," Eliza said quietly. His eyes lingered on her, sharp and unreadable, before he gave a single nod. "Then we're agreed." That night, as the storm raged outside and wind clawed at the eaves, Eliza lay awake in the small bed of the room that once held another woman's dreams. The town thought they had ended her by sending her here, burying her in silence beside a man who wanted no company. But as lightning split the sky and thunder rolled across the plains, a stubborn thought sparked in her chest. Storms did not always destroy. Sometimes they carved new paths where none had existed. And Eliza Carter was not finished yet. Dawn came early on the plains, long before Eliza's body was ready to rise. The faint gray light spilled through the cracks of the shutter, dragging her from a restless sleep. Wind rattled the windows as if reminding her that the prairie owned everything here, even the hours of a person's rest. When she stepped into the main room, Levy was already lacing his boots hat, pulled low eyes fixed on a point far away. He didn't greet her. He didn't need to. The scrape of the door against the floorboards spoke his farewell, leaving her in silence. The house felt abandoned, even with her inside it. Dust clung to the corners, cobwebs hung like old lace, and the smell of ashes clung to the hearth. Eliza set her jaw and began her work. If this was to be her prison, she would not let it crush her. She fetched water, coaxed the stove to life, and scrubbed the floors until her knees ached. The boards drank up the soap and water like parched earth. By mid-morning, she found herself standing in the garden plot, or what had once been one. Weeds taller than her knees tangled across the ground. Levi had told her it was useless land not worth planting, but as she looked at the stubborn shoots of thistle and wild grass, something inside her whispered otherwise. Useless land was her specialty. She knelt and began to pull dirt packing under her fingernails, sweat streaking through the dust on her face. Levy returned near sundown, shoulders heavy from a day in the fields. He watched her crouched in the garden sleeves, rolled skirts smeared with mud. "Waste of effort," he said, voice curt. She straightened, pushing damp hair from her forehead. "So am I," she replied, "but I'm still here." His eyes narrowed unreadable, and he turned without another word. But the next morning when she rose before the roosters crow, she found the garden fence mended. The posts stood firm wire stretched taut, the work of strong hands, done in the quiet of night. He never mentioned it. Neither did she, but she felt the truce settle between them, silent and fragile. In return, she took on the barn. Where his tools had lain scattered and his harnesses rotted in piles, she brought order. By week's end, the place smelled of hay, again not neglect. When he stepped inside and saw the neat rows of gear, he said nothing. But that night she found a bundle of wild herbs on the table, their scent sharp and clean. It was the first gift she had received in years. September rolled into October, the air sharpening with every sunrise. Eliza woke one morning to frost on the window pane, white lace traced by winter's fingers. Levi was already in the yard, breath steaming as he hauled wood toward the porch. "Going to be a hard winter," he muttered when she stepped outside, tugging her shawl tight. "Need to drive the cattle south to shelter." "I'll help," she said. He turned, surprise flashing across his steel blue eyes. "You ride. I was raised in the saddle." By afternoon, she was astride a mare called Daisy Skirts, hitched clumsily, but hands steady on the reins. 30 head of cattle pressed before them, their breaths clouds in the bitter air. The work was brutal, the wind cutting through her bones, but when a steer broke from the herd, instinct took over. She wheeled Daisy around and drove it back with a sharp call. Levy's gaze followed her, narrowed against the cold. "Ride better than well enough," he said at last. "My father raised horses," she replied simply. For the first time since she had arrived, his mouth bent towards something close to a smile. "Full of surprises, aren't you?" The warmth that flickered in her chest lasted long after the herd was settled. That night, as snow began to fall, the house shook under the storm. Eliza wrapped herself in a thin blanket by the fire teeth, chattering. Levi studied her for a long moment, then tossed another log onto the flames. "No sense freezing in separate rooms," he said. He dragged out 2 bedrolls, one for each side of the hearth. Propriety remained, but the silence between them cracked. "Sarah loved storms," he said at last, voice low. Said they reminded her God was still moving in the world. "Me, I only hear what I lost." Eliza held her breath, struck by the rawness of his words. "I know something of loss," she said softly. "They called me barren, as if that was all I was." His eyes met hers across the flicker of fire. "Doesn't make you less of a woman," he said. "Sarah lost too before our boy came. Near broke her both times, but it never changed who she was." Tears stung behind Eliza's eyes, hot and sharp. No one had ever spoken such words to her. Then what makes a person whole, she asked. Levy's gaze was steady, unflinching, loving something enough to keep going. Work worth doing, maybe someone to share the load. The storm howled outside, but inside that small circle of firelight, something fragile stirred. Trust, perhaps, or the first thin shoots of hope pushing through hard ground. When morning came, the prairie lay buried in white, glittering under the rising sun. Levi poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. Their hands brushed in the exchange, neither pulling away. North fence is down, he said gruffly. We'll fix it together, she answered. His eyes lingered, testing the word. Together, he repeated, then gave a single nod. In that quiet agreement, something shifted. No longer strangers bound by necessity, but two people standing side by side against the relentless land. February's wind clawed through the gaps in the cabin walls, shrieking down the chimney, and turning each dawn into a battle against cold and hunger. Eliza rose early every day, layering shawls, stoking the fire, until sparks leapt in coaxing thin porridge from dwindling stores. Levy worked outside, from first light driving cattle to water repairing fences half buried in snow, his figure a dark line against the white horizon. Their words had grown easier, less brittle. Sometimes he told stories of Missouri, where he had been a boy before the West claimed him. Sometimes he asked about her childhood, and she answered cautiously but truthfully. They were learning to share the silence, to carry the weight together. On a night when the snow came down hard enough to erase the world, a knock startled them both. It was soft, barely audible above the storm, but unmistakable. Eliza opened the door to find a young woman swaying on the porch, hair plastered to her feverish face, arms wrapped around a bundle. Before Eliza could speak, the stranger collapsed into her. The bundle whimpered, a baby no more than a few months old. Levi appeared at her side, eyes narrowing at the sight. They dragged the woman to the fire, peeled away her soaked shawl, and pressed warm cloths to her skin. She managed to whisper her name, Rose Sullivan, before coughing racked her thin frame. "My boy," she gasped, pushing the child into Eliza's arms. "William, promise you'll keep him safe." Eliza's heart clenched. She had held babies before, nieces and nephews placed in her lap at family gatherings, but never as her own. William's tiny fingers gripped her shawl with astonishing strength. For 3 days, Eliza nursed Rose with broth herbs and whispered prayers. She rocked William through long nights, singing half-forgotten lullabies her mother once crooned. But the sickness was too strong. On the third dawn, as snowlight seeped through frosted glass, Rose's breathing stilled. She left the world with a faint smile meant for her son. They buried her on the hill behind the house, a wooden cross hammered into frozen ground. The wind keened like a mourner. Eliza stood at the grave, William cradled against her chest. Her barren heart ached in a new way, an ache both impossible and undeniable. Levy laid a steady hand on her shoulder. "He needs a home," he said simply. "We've got one." From that moment, life changed. William cried through nights, demanded milk and warmth, refused to be set down. Eliza, who once believed she would never be a mother, found herself walking the floorboards by lamplight, humming softly, her heart splitting wider with each cry and coo. Levy surprised her too. She caught him once with the boy nestled against his chest, broad hands cradling the tiny body as he murmured about cattle and weather. "He's a good listener," Levy said when he noticed her watching, and for the first time Eliza laughed. Laughed so hard, tears filled her eyes. In town, the whispers stirred. Convenient, they said, the barren bride suddenly with a child. But Levi's jaw hardened like stone when he heard. Once, when Mrs. Henderson hinted too sharply, his voice cut the air. "This is my family. Anyone with a problem can take it up with me." After that, the gossip softened, though not entirely. Spring thaw brought more than green shoots. A carriage rolled into Cedar Ridge, polished and gleaming, so out of place on the muddy track that folks stopped to stare. From it stepped a man named Charles Hartley, smooth voice, fine coat, and papers clutched in his gloved hand. He claimed William as his son, insisting he could give the boy opportunities they could not, schooling wealth a proper name. "He has a name," Levy answered, voice like iron. "William Monroe. And he has a home." The matter went to court. The whole town turned out to witness. Hartley's lawyer painted grand pictures of privilege. Levi's witnesses spoke of love, sacrifice, and second chances. Eliza sat stiff-backed William in her lap, dread like lead in her stomach. Then the Reverend produced the blow that sealed Hartley's fate. proof he already had a wife and children back east. His sudden claim on William was not paternal love, but inheritance greed dressed as concern. The judge's gavel cracked. The adoption stands. William Monroe remains with Jack and Eliza Monroe. Relief swept through her so fierce her knees nearly buckled. Levi's arm wrapped around her, steadying her. William gurgled and clapped his small hands as if celebrating his own victory. That summer, under the wide sky, Levi and Eliza weed before neighbors and God. She wore blue, simple but strong. He looked younger than she had ever seen him. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer shook the rafters. The town that once pitied her now admired her. The barren bride had become a mother, a wife, and part of a family built not by chance but by choice. That night on the porch, William asleep between them, Levi squeezed her hand. "They thought it was a joke sending you here," he said softly. "But look at us now." Eliza leaned against him, heart overflowing. "Some jokes," she whispered, "turn into blessings." Levi kissed her hair, his voice sure. "We're not broken anymore, Eliza. We're whole because we chose to be." Under the endless western stars, she knew he was right. What had begun as punishment had become salvation. 3 wounded souls, man, woman, and child, had fitted together into something unbreakable. The first summer as a family brought more than joy. It also carried the weight of survival. The prairie could be generous with grass and rain, or it could withhold both until men cursed the sky and women prayed to dust. By July, the ground cracked beneath their boots. The river that wound near the north pasture had shrunk to a trickle, and cattle bawled in hunger as pastures turned brittle. Levi rode out each morning before dawn, searching for water holes, driving the herd to higher ground where grass still clung to life. Eliza managed the house garden, and William, who was crawling now, his small hands forever reaching for things he should not touch. She tied him on her back with a long strip of cloth when chores demanded both hands. He laughed against her shoulders as she hauled water-scrubbed clothes or bent over stubborn plants. The garden was a constant battle. Weeds grew where vegetables faltered, sun scorched the young shoots. Eliza refused to yield. She carried buckets from the well until her arms ached, pouring precious drops into thirsty soil. "You're wasting effort," Levi warned one evening, dust streaking his face from the range. She straightened, sweat soaking her hairline. "So am I, remember, but I'm still here." His eyes softened, though he shook his head. That night after she had fallen asleep, he dragged a barrel from the barn rigging, gutters from scrap tin, to catch what little rain might fall. When she saw it the next morning, she bit back tears. Silent gestures had become his way of saying what words would not. August brought fire. Lightning struck dry brush miles to the west, and within hours smoke rolled across the horizon. Levi and the ranch hands raced to cut fire breaks, shovels and wet sacks their only weapons. Eliza joined them, William strapped on her back, swinging a shovel until blisters split her palms. The flames roared close enough to scorch her skirts, but when dawn broke, the ranch still stood. Blackened ground scarred the edges, but the heart of their land had been spared. When it was over, Levi caught her arm, pulling her aside. "You could have been killed," he snapped, his voice sharper than she had ever heard. She pulled her arm free. "So could you. But if this land burns, we burn with it. I won't sit idle while you fight for what's ours." For a long moment they glared at one another, stubborn wills colliding. Then Levi's shoulders sagged. "Ours?" He repeated, softer now, as though the word was a revelation. He brushed dirt from her cheek with a rough thumb, his touch lingering longer than necessary. The fire left them weary but not broken. Neighbors came from miles to help mend fences and share supplies. One evening, as they sat around the long table, William on Eliza's lap, Levi raised a tin cup. "To family," he said. "The ones we're born to and the ones we choose." The men echoed him, and Eliza felt the warmth of belonging settle deep. But not all neighbors were kind. Whispers began again, carried by those who resented Levi's independence or envied the survival of his land. One man in particular, Edgar Tate, a rancher with failing stock, began spreading rumors in town. He claimed William was no orphan at all, that Levi and Eliza had tricked the judge with false papers. He said barren women had no place raising children meant for better families. Levi heard of it first. He slammed his fist against the table so hard William cried. "I'll put a stop to it," he growled. Eliza rocked the boy, steadying her own heart. You'll only give his lies more weight if you fight him in anger. We prove him wrong by living, by standing tall. Levy paced the cabin like a caged animal, but he listened. Still, the tension hung like thunder. September brought the trial of harvest. Corn stalks, wilted beans, shriveled, but enough survived to fill jars for winter. Eliza worked until her hands bled, blanching, salting, storing every scrap that could last through snow. Levi hunted more than before, bringing home deer and quail. William learned to toddle across the cabin floor, laughter spilling like sunlight through the weariness. On the first frost morning, they stood together in the doorway, breath clouding the air. William tugged at Levi's trousers, squealing for attention. Levi scooped him up, the boy's giggles muffled against his chest. "We made it through," Levi said, voice quiet but firm. Barely, Eliza replied, but her smile betrayed the pride swelling inside her. He glanced at her, then eyes lingering with unspoken words. "Barely is enough," he said, "because we're still here." That night, as they sat by the fire, William asleep between them, Levi reached across the small space and took Eliza's hand. It was rough, hesitant, but steady. "I don't want this to be just survival," he said. "Not anymore." Her heart thudded the walls she had built, trembling. "Then what do you want, Levi?" He looked into the flames, then back at her. "A life. With you. With him. Not because we were pushed together by pity, but because we choose it." The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of wood. Then Eliza tightened her fingers around his. "Then we'll choose it. Every day. Together." Outside, the wind carried the scent of frost and distant pine. Inside, the warmth of a fragile promise bloomed, small, stubborn, but alive. Like the first green shoot pushing through hard earth, proof that even in the harshest land, love could take root. Autumn laid its copper hand over the prairie, and for a time life seemed steady. Cattle grazed fat on the last sweep of grass. Jars lined the shelves, and William toddled across the cabin floor with a laugh that filled every shadow. Eliza sometimes caught herself standing still in the doorway, watching Levi lift their boy high, both of them grinning, and thought this was what she had been denied all her life. A home not built of walls, but of hearts bound together. Yet peace on the frontier was fragile always. The land tested every bond, and so did men. Edgar Tate nursed his jealousy like whiskey, and jealousy soured into cruelty. When the first snow fell, he rode into town with stories darker than rumor. He claimed William was born of sin, that Eliza had lured some drifter to her bed, passing the child as an orphan. He said Levi was blind, a fool shackled to a barren woman who used pity as her weapon. The words spread like smoke. By Sunday service, half the pews in Cedar Ridge whispered when the Monroes entered. Eliza kept her chin high, clutching William close. Levi's jaw was carved from stone. The reverend sermon stumbled under the weight of so many eyes turning not toward heaven, but toward them. After in the churchyard, Mrs. Clark approached with false sweetness. "Such a lively boy, Mrs. Monroe. Shame the whispers follow him. Surely you understand it's confusing for the town." Eliza met her gaze. "Confusing perhaps for those who measure worth by gossip. We measure it by love." Then she walked away, shoulders straight, though her heart hammered. That night, Levi paced the cabin like a wolf. "I should end this," he muttered. "Ride to Tate's ranch, settle it once and for all." "With fists?" Eliza asked quietly. "With bullets?" He stopped, hands curling. "With truth, maybe. But men like him don't listen to truth." "Then let them watch," she said. "Let them see us endure. That's what breaks men like Tate, our living, not our fighting." Libby's breath hissed between his teeth, but at last he nodded. Still, vigilance sharpened. The ranch hands rode patrol, more often rifles within reach. Eliza kept William close, never letting him wander beyond her sight. One bitter evening in December, trouble came not as rumor, but as gunpowder. Shadows moved at the edge of the barn. A lantern shattered flames, licking at dry hay. Levi shouted, men thundered from the bunkhouse, and shots cracked the night. Eliza snatched William from his cradle, heart pounding as smoke filled the air. "Stay low," Levy barked, bursting into the cabin, rifle blazing in his hands. He shoved them toward the root cellar. "Don't come out till I call." But Eliza, stubborn as the land itself, refused to cower while their life burned. She set William in the cellar, kissing his damp curls, then grabbed the pistol Levy had given her months ago. Outside, chaos, raged horses, screaming men, shouting the barn a pillar of fire. She saw Tate's men in the glow bandanas covering their faces, torches raised. She lifted the pistol hands steady. The crack split the night. One torch dropped another, man cursed, stumbling. Levi turned at the sound, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. Not anger, never that, but fierce, startled pride. The fight dragged until dawn, but the ranch stood. The barn was charred, fences broken, yet cattle still lived, and so did they. Tate's men fled into the hills, leaving only smoke and blood behind. As the first pale light spread across the wreckage, Levi found Eliza sitting on the porch steps. William clutched to her chest, her pistol across her knees. He knelt, his hands rough but gentle as they cupped her face. "You saved us," he said. "We saved each other," she whispered. The sheriff came by noon, jaw grim as he surveyed the damage. "Tate's gone too far. I'll see him answer for this." But they all knew justice was slow and vengeance swifter. In the weeks that followed, neighbors arrived with lumber and tools helping rebuild. Even those who once whispered now brought food and blankets, shame in their eyes. One old rancher clapped Levi's shoulder. "You've got a wife worth 10 men, Morgan. Don't let anyone tell you different." Levi only smiled faintly, but that night as William slept, he took Eliza's hand. "They tried to shame you, tried to shame us. But all I see is strength. All I see is the woman who turned this place from ashes into a home." Her throat tightened. "We'll always be fighting, won't we? Against storms, against men, against whispers." "Maybe," Levi said, "but we'll be fighting together. And that makes all the difference." Outside, winter pressed hard against the land. Inside, the fire burned bright, fed by more than wood. Fed by love, by defiance, by the quiet vow they carried in every glance. Spring crept back across the prairie like a slow forgiveness. Patches of green pushed through blackened earth. Wildflowers braved the wind, and the creek near the south pasture ran fuller than it had in months. For the first time since the fire, laughter carried across the Monroe Ranch again. William's small, bright giggles as he chased chickens in the yard. Eliza's soft hum while hanging laundry. Levi's rare but warming chuckle when the boy tugged at his boots and demanded a ride on his shoulders. Yet peace never stayed long on western soil. One morning as dawn's light washed the valley gold, a rider appeared on the ridge. Tall, sharp-shouldered, his horse a glossy bay that spoke of money. He rode with the kind of confidence that came from ownership, not asking. When he reached the yard, his eyes swept the rebuilt barn, the new fences, and finally rested on Eliza, who stood with William balanced on her hip. "Jack Monroe?" the stranger asked, his voice smooth as polished wood. Levi stepped from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. "That's me." The man dismounted, dusting his coat. "Name's Matthew Crow. My father once held deed to this land, sold it under duress to your kin years back. I'm here to reclaim what's mine." He produced a folded paper, edges worn but the ink clear. "Legal claim, signed and witnessed." Silence fell heavy. Eliza's pulse quickened, memories of whispers and trials rushing back. Levi took the paper, scanning it with narrowed eyes. "This deed's older than me. My father bought fair, worked every inch since. You think you can ride in and take it now?" Crow smiled thinly. "Land remembers its rightful owner. I'll give you time, say till the end of the month, to move along. After that, I'll come back with men and the law at my side." He mounted again, tipping his hat at Eliza in a way that made her skin crawl. "Enjoy the view while you still can, Mrs. Monroe." Dust rose as he rode off, leaving tension choking the air. Levy's jaw worked as he crumpled the paper. "Scavenger," he muttered, "waiting for others to bleed so he can claim their ground." "Can he?" Eliza asked quietly, shifting William closer. "Can he take it?" Levy looked at her, eyes storm gray. "Not while I'm breathing." The days that followed were heavy with preparation. Fences, reinforced rifles, cleaned, neighbors quietly warned. Hank rode out to gather news, returning with word that Crow had indeed hired guns drifting from the border towns. The sheriff promised to investigate the claim, but his voice carried doubt. Papers like Crow's, even if forged, could drag them into years of court battles. Eliza felt the old fear stir that they might lose not by fire or storm, but by signatures on parchment. Yet she refused to be powerless again. She sat late into nights by lamplight drafting letters. One to the county clerk demanding copies of every transfer of deed. One to the reverend asking him to speak of honesty and justice at Sunday service. And one to Francis Bennett, her uncle in San Francisco, who had once defended her honor. Levy watched her, silent pride in his eyes. "You fight different than me," he said one night. I swing an axe. You swing words. But I reckon both cut deep. As April bled into May, tensions coiled tighter. Crow appeared in town, often buying rounds at the saloon, shaking hands with men who valued coin over conscience. Whispers returned dark as storm clouds. Maybe the Monroes didn't belong? Maybe William wasn't theirs to raise? Maybe God himself had cursed barren women. Eliza bore it with the same iron spine she had carried since Cedar Ridge. But when she lay down at night, William curled against her. She felt the weight of every whisper pressing down. Then came the Sunday Crow strode into church. He took a front pew, his fine coat shining, and when the service ended, he stood and addressed the congregation. "Neighbors," he drawled, "I've come to reclaim my family's land. You all know the Monroes, good folk, hardworking, but squatting where they have no right. I ask only fairness. Stand with me and I'll see this valley prosper." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Levi stood slowly, broad shoulders squared. "This land was bought with sweat and graves. My father's, my mother's, and every scar on my back. You want it, Crow, you'll have to take it from the hands that built it." Gasps rose. The Reverend tried to calm them, but the line had been drawn. Crow left with a smile as though every whisper in his favor was already victory. That night, Eliza sat with Levi on the porch, William asleep inside. "He'll come soon," she said. "Let him," Levi replied, voice hard. "But he doesn't know us, Eliza. Doesn't know what we've already survived." She slipped her hand into his. "Then we'll show him." Beyond the horizon, thunder rolled though the sky was clear. The prairie had its own way of warning storms were coming, not always from clouds, but from men. The prairie never forgot a promise, and by June, Matthew Crow returned with iron in his fists. He rode at the head of 6 hired guns, dust rising behind them like a warning. From the porch of the Monroe Ranch, Levi watched them come, rifle laid across his knees. Eliza stood inside the doorway, William clutched to her hip, her other hand resting on the pistol he had given her long ago. The ranch hands fanned out rifles ready. Silence held the land, broken only by the nervous shuffle of horses. Crow reined in at the gate, smiling as if he were at a neighbor's supper. "Time's up, Monroe," he called. "Pack your things and I'll let you leave with dignity." Levy rose slowly, his frame filling the yard like an unmovable tree. "This land was bought fair, worked hard, and paid for in blood. You'll not take it with paper or pistols." Crow's smile thinned. He lifted his hand. One of his men nudged his horse forward, brandishing a shotgun. The air cracked with tension, the kind that could spill blood with the slightest spark. Before Crow could speak again, Eliza stepped from the doorway. William on her hip, her pistol steady in her hand. Her voice carried clear. "You call this dignity, Crow, riding with hired killers to steal what others built a man like you? Mistakes greed for right. But this is our home, and we will not yield." A murmur rippled among the hired guns. Some shifted uneasily, glancing at Levi's men, hidden in the barn shadows, at Eliza's unflinching eyes. Crow scowled. "Foolish woman. You think words will change fate?" Levi's voice cut through like steel. "No. But bullets will, and I promise you the first one finds your heart." He lifted his rifle sight, fixed between Crow's eyes. For a heartbeat, time froze. The prairie wind held its breath. Then a single voice broke the stillness. It was Hank, one of the hands, shouting from the barn roof. "Sheriff's here." Thunder of hooves, and Sheriff Taylor rode in with 3 deputies, rifles drawn. "Crow!" he barked, "drop your weapons. I've got papers from Prescott. Your claim's a forgery, your hired men wanted for robbery south of the border." "It's over." Chaos erupted. 2 of Crow's men spurred their horses, trying to flee. Shots rang out, dust exploded, horses screamed. Levi fired once, sending a rifle spinning from a rider's hand. The sheriff's men cut off the other's cuffs, snapping shut in the dust. Crow, red with rage, drew his pistol, aiming not at Levi, but at Eliza. Her heart lurched, but before she could move, Levi fired. The bullet struck Crow's hand, shattering bone, his pistol clattering into the dirt. He howled, falling from his saddle. Deputies seized him, dragging him to his knees. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. Smoke drifted from Levi's rifle barrel. William whimpered against Eliza's shoulder, and she clutched him tighter, her breath shuddering with relief. The sheriff looked at Levi, then Eliza. "You stood your ground. The law will handle Crow now. His kind won't trouble you again." Crow spat blood into the dirt. "This ain't the end," he hissed. but his eyes betrayed the truth. He was finished. When the lawmen rode away with their prisoners, the ranch seemed to exhale. Levi set his rifle aside, crossing to Eliza. His hands, rough and trembling, cupped her face. "You were steady," he whispered. "Steadier than me." "We were steady together," she replied, leaning into his touch. That night the ranch gathered around a long table, food spread thin, but spirits rich. Neighbors came with pies and bread, offering hands and apologies for every whisper they had once believed. Hank lifted a cup of coffee and said simply to the Monroe's family, "Forged stronger than firestorm or lies." Cheers rose, echoing against the rafters. Later, when William slept safe in his cradle, Levi and Eliza stood on the porch. The prairie stretched endless beneath the stars, quiet now at peace. Levi slipped his arm around her shoulders. "They sent you here to bury you," he said, "but you grew roots instead. And now so have I." Eliza pressed her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "We're not broken anymore, Levi. We're whole because we chose it." He kissed her hair, voice low, certain. "And we'll keep choosing it every day, no matter what comes." In the hush of the prairie night, their silhouettes stood against the wide sky, man, woman, child, no longer misfits cast aside, but a family carved from defiance and love. And as the wind whispered through the grass, it carried their vow farther than any rumor could travel, that here on this patch of stubborn land, they had found not exile, but home. Years later, the prairie told a different story. Fences stretched strong and straight across rolling fields. Barns stood painted and proud, and laughter carried farther than any gunshot ever had. William, no longer a babe in arms, raced across the yard, with legs long and sure, his shouts echoing against the hills. He had his mother's auburn hair, his father's steady gray eyes, and a spirit that belonged to the land itself, untamed but rooted. Eliza often watched him from the porch, a book open in her lap, but forgotten as her gaze followed the boy. The whispers that once branded her barren, cursed unworthy, they had long since died beneath the weight of her truth. She was mother, wife, and mistress of a ranch that thrived because she refused to bend. Cedar Ridge folk now greeted her with respect, not pity, and when she walked into town with William's small hand in hers, heads turned not to whisper, but to nod in quiet admiration. Levi grew grayer at the temples, but his strength remained. He worked the herds by day, his broad shadow cast long against the pasture, and by evening he returned to the porch where William clambered into his lap with stories of daring adventures. Sometimes when the fire burned low, Levi would trace a calloused hand across Eliza's cheek, marveling still at the woman who had walked into his loneliness and refused to leave. The land itself bore witness to their bond. The garden Eliza once coaxed from barren soil now bloomed full vegetables and flowers, thriving side by side. The orchard they planted together stretched into neat rows, blossoms turning to fruit with each season. Neighbors came not to gossip, but to trade, to share meals, to ask advice. The Monroe Ranch was no longer an exile, it was a beacon. As William grew, the question of legacy stirred. Some nights Levi would sit quiet, watching his son sleep and murmur, "He'll carry this place farther than I ever could." Eliza, lying beside him, would smile softly. "Because he carries both of us," she'd reply. They never forgot the storms, the fire, the men who tried to take what was theirs. Those scars remained carved into memory like notches in old wood. But scars, Eliza knew, were proof of healing, not defeat. Every hardship had tempered them, made their family unbreakable. On a spring morning, much like the one when Crow first darkened their gate, Eliza stood again on the porch. William raced past, a colt at his heels, laughter spilling like music. Levi came from the barn, waving a hand in mock protest at the chaos. She looked at them, her son, her husband, her home, and felt the swell of something deeper than gratitude. They had begun as a cruel joke, a barren bride sent to a grieving cowboy. But time had rewritten that jest into a testament. Love, stubborn and defiant, had turned exile into belonging, loneliness, into partnership, loss into legacy. Eliza whispered it to the wind, to the wide sky, to the earth beneath her boots. "We are whole." And the prairie, endless and eternal, seemed to answer back in rustling grass and birdsong. Their story was no longer about shame or sorrow. It was about choosing each other day after day, and in that choice, finding a future that stretched wider than the horizon. The barren bride, the wounded cowboy, and the orphaned child had become something more than the sum of their broken pieces. They had become family. And in the heart of the West, under skies vast and forgiving, that was the strongest legacy of all.